Everyone. Welcome everyone to the co-chair training webinar, Leading Through Facilitation. A little bit about me. I worked in healthcare for a little more than 45 years. I worked as a registered nurse in the surgical ICU, trauma and transplant centers at 2 different academic medical centers for about 11 years. I then transitioned from that role within the same hospital setting, or at least one of the hospitals, to an informatics director position for 5 years. We were focused on system selection and implementation projects. And it was during that time that I had some exposure, my initial HL7 experience. After leaving direct care roles in the hospital setting, I became a product manager at several different levels within 3 different software companies. And I did that for a little over 20 years. My primary focus in those organizations was focused on health information exchange work, both in the United States and internationally. HL7 was a focus in many of those work opportunities. After that, because it's a long career, I served for 2 years as the interim director for the University of Colorado's master's degree program in healthcare informatics, and it was a program set up for registered nurses, and I currently am just a part-time teacher in that same program. My professional and volunteer experience with HL7 is over 20 years. I currently serve as a co-chair of the Pharmacy Work Group and also serve as the current HL7 treasurer on the HL7 board. In addition to the pharmacy work at HL7, I have worked and volunteered to work with various different HL7 work groups. Currently, that's the workflow activities that we do within the fire group, and then the O&O healthcare product work, to list a few. Enough about me. In this session, we're going to talk about learning objectives, HL7 facilitator roles. We're going to compare and contrast the role of a facilitator to the role of the workgroup co-chair. We're going to talk about the dynamics of group decision-making, facilitative listening skills, dealing with difficult dynamics, principles for building sustainable agreements, and then we'll do a retrospective summarizing the entire day's talk. I will take some breaks after about 3 or 4 slides. I think it's separating about that many, to see if there are questions in the chat. And if I can answer them, I will. And if I can't, we'll certainly take those questions down and try to address them long term. If others that are participating in this call may have answers, because one person doesn't necessarily need to have all the information. And if you do have answers to those questions, please chime in with a chat message and contribute to the discussion. The learning objectives for this tutorial. We're attempting to provide skills required to be an effective HL7 work group facilitator. I know that you are all either existing co-chairs or you're new co-chairs, and it may be interesting for you to understand that some of you are already performing some of these duties today, and some of you may not be. So you're going to see 4 different facilitator roles mentioned later in this presentation. You don't need to be in one of those roles to be a facilitator in a work group meeting. Whether it's a weekly conference call, whether it's at a work group meeting, and your particular work group is meeting there, you'll notice that facilitation skills, as we're going to talk about them later on, are important to be successful and to have a successful outcome of whatever the problem is that you're trying to discuss or the topic you're trying to discuss. The role of facilitators is to encourage full participation, promote mutual understanding, and of course, foster participatory decision-making. It may sound like a common sense comment, but if you have a lot of experience in these meetings, you'll notice it's not always a common sense solution. There are skills, and it's important to understand them. Upon completion of this tutorial, the participants will have attained knowledge and skills in the following areas. You'll understand more and a little bit about various facilitator roles that are formal within HL7, the dynamics of group decision-making, facilitative listening skills, dealing with difficult dynamics, and principles for building sustainable agreements. The formal roles at HL7, there are modeling facilitators, publishing facilitators, vocabulary facilitators, and project facilitators. Not every work group will have every one of these roles in every project that they work on. I can just give you some experiences within pharmacy. We've had formal vocabulary facilitators, but probably for the last, I would say, 6 years, we don't have a formal vocabulary facilitator. But that doesn't mean that requirement or those needs don't still exist. We reach out formally to contact the vocabulary folks who will then contact us to answer questions, and there will be people that can facilitate and answer those questions. In general, there are a lot of vocabulary skills within our work group, as I assume there are within many of your work groups. So I'm sure that you're going to find that some of these skills, even though you might not be in a formal role, still come into play. In these particular ones, just a little bit drill down, modeling facilitators. This comes into play quite often when you're first attempting to develop a resource, if we're talking about fire from scratch, or if you're trying to build a domain analysis model. These facilitators, they're usually following a formal methodology, the HL7 development framework, which does exist. It existed before fire. It still exists today. It's changed and modified, and you can get a lot of useful information if you take a look at that. And when you go to fire, if you just search on HL7 development framework, you'll find some links for that kind of information. You're going to be using HL7 design guidance and perhaps some tools as well. Publishing facilitators, these facilitators are responsible for the submission of content. They follow the guidelines that, again, you'll find in the HL7 Essentials reference page in Confluence. In general, your role is to assure that publishing tasks are carried out and timely, and it's also a mechanism to raise questions in a timely manner to address any publishing issues related to the publishing process. What we find, again, with my pharmacy hat on, is that there are several of the co-chairs that have more skills in this area than others, and we take advantage of those skills by relying on them to make sure that we're meeting deadlines and we're able to kind of communicate these requirements to new projects and people that are bringing new ballot material forward. Vocabulary facilitators, I spoke about that a little bit. Project facilitators, you'll find that projects that are brought forward, whether they're through an accelerator or whether they're through a customer or somebody external, will bring this information forward. And these project facilitators often have questions about how to fit within the HL7 framework if they're new to it. And so it's important to reach out to them and to apply a lot of the skills that you're going to be hearing later on in this presentation to help manage those types of projects. It can be anything from completing project scope statements, facilitating the project approval process, or even tracking the projects in HL7's project management tool. That's often an HL7 co-chair task, but the project managers, if you will, or facilitators for those projects need to bring information forward so you can make sure that your project insight is up to date and accurate. I'll cover this slide and then maybe take a few questions if you have any. There are a variety of definitions for facilitator. I'm not going to read every one of these, but the one that's highlighted probably best capture what I think is important to understand. The facilitator's job is to support everyone to do their best thinking and practice. This means the facilitator encourages participation from every person that's in the meeting that you're attending. It could be a meeting dealing with a variety of different kinds of issues. For instance, where's my laundry list, my cheat sheet? Whether we're talking about a new issue, a new tracker, a new discussion topic that's brought forward, an update, or the creation of a brand new resource, a project-specific set of questions or issues that's arisen, vocabulary issues, a requirements discussion, or even a simple question like, how does your resource do this? Or does your resource do this? In every one of those cases, someone needs to facilitate that discussion so that we bring in everybody's thoughts and opinions and make sure that we clearly understand the question, but also that we're reaching a decision that's understandable and supportive for not only the person who's asking the questions, but others who heard it and are asking different types of questions during the discussion. It's a tough role. Many co-chairs have those kinds of skills as well as all the administrative responsibilities that their role carries as the work group co-chair. There are two words in this particular page in a lot of these definitions that are important. Facilitator is a content-neutral task leader. It's a challenge. I know as a co-chair who has a lot of domain knowledge, it's tough sometimes not to share your opinions from a non-content neutral perspective. That challenge is one that you always need to be aware of and try to maintain some kind of self-discipline, if you will, to make sure that you're listening to the questions and making sure that you're being responsive and bringing in everybody into that discussion in a collaborative way. This is really critical if we're talking about new members to your work group. I remember back many, many years ago when I entered my first work group, and it's like walking in the middle of a complex discussion where you're not really sure what the process is, let alone what the topic is. And while you may have knowledge, a little bit of knowledge, your comments and your thoughts about whatever that particular topic or issue is may be off target. While a facilitator can not only encourage your participation, but kind of bring you back into focus if they're listening. And you'll see a lot how those skills evolve again later in this presentation. I'm going to take a quick pause here to see if there are any chat questions, and then we'll continue with the discussion. And it looks like I don't see any new questions here, so I'm going to keep moving. An excellent guide on facilitation is this textbook, Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making. It supports everyone to do their best thinking and practice. Full participation, mutual understanding, shared responsibility. It supports everyone attempting to do their best thinking, and the facilitator, a good facilitator, enables this, and it allows at the end of that process an inclusive solution that supports sustainable agreements. The worst case scenario is if there's no facilitation, we may end up with an agreement that doesn't meet everyone's needs, and maybe it's not understood by everyone, so therefore it is not inclusive, and we run into issues downstream. There's something called the Work Group Co-Chair Handbook. I'm sure that some of you, if not all of you, have looked at this. The co-chair is the administrator leader of the work group. Many of us have been elected to those positions. In some cases, you may be appointed by the chair of HL7 for some of the work groups that happens. And many work groups have more than one co-chair. These skills apply to all of those co-chairs within each of those work groups. In my experience, the co-chair is responsible for making sure that the agendas are created and take input from questions from their attendees. It could be anything from a new email that raises an issue that pops up on your desk to the group of co-chairs, and you have a discussion about that and make sure that makes its way into the agenda, respecting the timeline and the time frame of the person who's submitting that question. It could be a Zulip chat issue that shows up that you need to address. There's many, many different ways in which these kind of issues will end up coming to the work group co-chair's attention. They preside over the meetings of the work group. They conduct the business in an orderly fashion using Robert rules in order to address issues that need to be appropriately voted upon. When the work group is not in session, the co-chair's duties include acting as its head, its representative of the outside world, and its spokesperson. So that means responding perhaps to other work groups' questions, perhaps patient care issues that they want to bring to the attention of pharmacy, or pharmacy has issues they want to bring the attention to O&O, that co-chair is typically the first voice that reaches out and contacts some of those others so that we can bring everybody into the discussion. Rather than in the old days, a formal document, you can find the co-chair handbook in Confluence, and there's a link in this presentation that you can find on the website. Let's talk a little bit more about the roles. A facilitator could be selected by or assigned to a project. When you look at the projects when they're initially created, the scope statements, you will find that they actually have placeholders to identify specifically by name various facilitators. So you could be designated and identified through that means. You may have a skill such as you're a project liaison to one or more foundation and technology work group. It's not uncommon that even if the pharmacy work group, for instance, as an example, we're the sponsor of a particular project, that particular project that that we are sponsoring has a requirement to communicate what's going on with that project to another group, whether that's patient care, whether it's public health. It doesn't really matter which group it is. The facilitator is responsible for making sure that that communication happens. And if new issues arise, they're keeping all the affected parties aware of what's going on. The skills of the facilitator, they can vary. They could be a knowledge worker skills. You could have expertise, domain expertise. You could have technical or skill area expertise as well. You are a project team member often, and you have active work product that you're contributing to that particular project you're working on. Or you may be an enabler, which means you may be reaching out to identify individuals who may not be attending an HL7 meeting, but are contributors to the particular project that you're working on. The last bullet point for facilitator reads, encourages full participation, promotes mutual understanding, and cultivates shared responsibility. That's not uncommon. That's identical, actually, to one of the responsibilities for a co-chair. But co-chairs have a little bit of a different focus as well. They're often elected, as I mentioned before, or appointed to a work group. They're a work group representative, which means they are also a liaison to a work group's steering committee or other folks that make sure that they're working in unison with the general policies for that particular group of work groups that share certain common elements. They're an administrative leader. They're accountable. So when new policies come through the organization of HL7 and you need to communicate that, you are the person responsible or persons responsible in your co-chair role to communicate that to your essential folks who attend your work group. You may be, not always, but you may be a project team sponsor. If a particular project is brought forward and you've evaluated it and your work group agrees to be the project team sponsor, then yes, the co-chair has a role to make sure that that project team keeps them informed by reaching out and continuing that communication and those lines of communication to keep them open. But in addition to that, you're also responsible for identifying timelines and deadlines that need to be met and to hold votes so that notice, for instance, of intent to ballot issues have been addressed or other types of issues that need to be addressed. You're really responsible for keeping them in line and communicating that. And as I mentioned, the last thing, and that's probably why it's highlighted there, we are encouraging full participation, promoting mutual understanding, and cultivating shared responsibility. It goes hand in hand. There have been many times when I've been not, if you will, the chair that's scribing a particular, or the scribe for a particular meeting, but as a co-chair in that meeting, if I hear issues being brought up by one of the folks that seem to be a little shy or hesitant about raising issues, it's inherent in your facilitator role to call on them, to ask them to speak up a little bit more, maybe to summarize what they're saying and bring some of those points out. We want to get everybody's opinions into a certain discussion. In some cases, you want to make sure that whatever issue has been raised is restated or is a little clearer. And I think my only point here is that while we are comparing, contrasting, co-chairs can be facilitators in different ways and often are in many meetings. What are facilitator skills? The dynamics of group decision-making, facilitative listening skills, dealing with difficult dynamics, and then principles for building sustainable agreements. We're going to talk about each of these 4 areas in the next few slides. If any of you would go out to Google and click and search for the groan zone, you'll find a number of graphic descriptions of this. And what it's talking about is that laundry list of various issues that may come up or that require some facilitative skills happen because we have people or individuals bringing up a new topic for many different reasons. Often, when that topic is raised, there's a lot of divergent thinking. As some people are trying to understand it, they're asking questions that may be off target, they may be on target, they may be inappropriate questions, they may be appropriate questions, but the thinking tends to be very divergent. It's literally all over the place, not uncommon. On the far right-hand side of this particular graphic, you want to reach this point where there's a shared framework of understanding. It says convergent thinking. It doesn't mean at the end of the day that everybody agrees with everything, but it does mean that all of the various points of view have been shared and communicated in a way that is being understood by the party so you can reach a shared framework of understanding and hopefully a shared framework solution. So what are some of the barriers to reaching that convergent thinking point of view at the end of it? One is time, because it takes time to move from divergent thinking to convergent. And there's a lot of individual behaviors that kind of get in the way of that, whether it's self-censorship. So I start to share something and then I start to think, you know what, I'm kind of new to this topic. My question may be off base. And so inside your head, I'm going to keep quiet. I'm not going to talk. That really doesn't help the conversation. You need to contribute to the conversation and be a contributing member so that your questions, which you think may be off target, can be answered. And it may be that they're off target, but it may mean that they're actually contributing to the solution. Taking of fixed positions. It's not uncommon that some people, when they bring their issue up, they say, and this is how you should fix my problem. You know, they have a fixed understanding of how the problem should be solved. Some people don't come in with that kind of mechanism, but maybe they got a lot of experience with that type of issue and they say, well, this is the only way that issue should ever be solved. And so that's what they'll do. And they'll share that particular perspective. Win-lose mentality, we've all seen this a little bit. You know, we've probably dealt with people that there's my way or the wrong way. In other words, win or lose. That's their communication style. That's really not very effective either. And so there's a lot of challenges in that particular approach. Reliance on authority is another area where you're going to see people and listen to people that will talk about, you know what, such and such has a lot of knowledge in this area. I'm just going to rely on whatever they say. I'm going to go along with whatever's going on over there. You really need to kind of break yourself out of that habit, suggesting that the only way this is ever going to be answered is relying on some expert authority. It's not a good way to grow in terms of your own personal growth and experience with these kind of projects, but it's also a nice exercise to take advantage of. These slides are building on that and talking about it again. And I guess the takeaway point on this particular slide is that understanding group dynamics is an indispensable core competency for anyone who wants to help their group tap the enormous potential of participatory decision-making. I talk about these, but overcoming self-censorship, overcoming the taking of fixed positions, overcoming the win-lose mentality, and the overcoming reliance on authority. The bullets are pretty much self-explanatory there. I've spoken to them a little bit, but just to be repetitive, self-censorship, you want to encourage full participation, build a respectful, supportive atmosphere that encourages people to keep thinking instead of shutting down. Overcome the taking of fixed positions. Accept the inevitability of misunderstanding. There's in every group discussion that I've been in, there's always somebody that's gonna, and I've been guilty of this as well, I will come at it from another perspective when that's really not what they're talking about. I may have a complete misunderstanding of whatever that particular point was. So one needs to treat everyone respectfully, stay impartial, and honor all points of view and keep listening. Keep the dialogue open. Overcoming the win-lose mentality, you need to foster those inclusive solutions. So build a shared framework of understanding, formulate creative, innovative ideas, and hopefully that reflects the weaving together of several different perspectives. And lastly, overcoming reliance on authority, cultivate that shared responsibility again, seek to inspire the group members to stand up and take risks. As a facilitator, it's important that you listening to the various contributors to a discussion and you call them out and saying, can you elaborate? This is what I understood you to say. Is this what you're saying? And you may want to paraphrase it if they're a little shy about bringing up their topic again, and then kind of get that mechanism to have them contribute to the discussion. Endorse the value of assertiveness, collaboration, and shared responsibility. I'm going to take one more break here and see if there are any questions that come so far. The question is, what do you do when you have a co-chair that has a difficult demeanor and tends to squash input or gets touchy when redirected? Where do you go for help when your in-group is being impacted by a personality problem? I think the short answer to that is it's never easy. If you feel the co-chair themselves or someone within that meeting who has some kind of power, whether it's formal or informal, is causing an issue, in most groups I've been in, there are multiple co-chairs. I would reach out to another co-chair. If you don't feel comfortable doing that within that same work group, that was my first comment. If you have a relationship with another co-chair that you feel comfortable sharing the issue with, sometimes you can ask them to help you navigate that communication with one co-chair in one work group to bring a discussion to another work group's attention. I don't think one should just hang on to that discomfort feeling and not move forward, but you need to, if you don't make it visible, meaning talk to somebody about it, nothing's going to happen with that. You've got to kind of take that step. I know people have called me on the carpet before when I've been a little bit rigorous in terms of the way that I was talking about a particular issue. I know, especially when I was new, I was kind of like a bull in a china shop. You need to have somebody that will speak to you respectfully and listen to you, and not publicly, and let you know what might be a better approach to deal with certain issues. So I think that kind of discussion can bear fruit, but that's my suggestion, at least for dealing with that particular topic. I think there was one more question here. 1 second.
John?
1 second. I'm just reading the next one here. There was a great point that, well, the question is, what makes this group decision-making different from any enterprise committee or board of directors if there's a difference, of course? And I would suggest there's no difference. Facilitation needs to happen in any group decision-making body. Probably the only thing that makes this more tangible is that we're not all sitting on boards of directors, and these kind of meetings, there's many opportunities for this, whether it is a weekly conference call or a biweekly conference call, whether it's a work group meeting, whether it's a discussion outside of the work group meeting, but maybe you've been assigned as a subcommittee a responsibility to talk about some topic. I think these facilitation skills can be used in every one of those settings. Another commenter raised a great point. None of this implies that one shouldn't come, if one can, with a fully baked, flushed out proposal. This isn't to discourage that. I think the point I think that I would react to that comment is that when a fully baked out or flushed proposal is brought to a discussion point, it's up to the communicator of that proposal then to elicit feedback and communicate it clearly so people can ask their questions. Some may seem like they're off target. Be respectful, listen to them, and as clear and as succinctly as possible, work through those issues so that you can get the consensus that you need such that your proposal can be carried through. Would you share 2 best practices to promote converging thinking? Oh, that's a challenge. I'm pausing because I'm thinking about this, but one of the behaviors that I've found to be most helpful, this really ties in a little bit with a later topic, is when you have a lot of struggles in that middle phase where there's a lot of divergent stuff going all over the place, you're going to see some suggestions about how to deal with various types of issues. So I'm going to defer that for a little bit, and I'll come back to that comment when we get to that discussion about how to deal with difficult scenarios. And there are some suggestions about how to deal with it. And there are many, many different approaches for that. So I will come back to that topic. Let me see if there's another question here. All right. Facilitative listening skills. An idea that is expressed in acceptable communication style will be taken more seriously by more people. It's not unusual that you'll have various communication styles and skills with people who come to the various work groups that we all work in. We need to be patient. We need to listen, and we need to help either make our points clear, or in some cases, as facilitators, help that individual communicate their particular issues more clearly. So if the ideas that are presented poorly are often harder for people to hear, if not impossible. Therefore, it's important for the facilitator to listen and skillfully and respectfully to everyone. And so some of these suggestions here are, and this is still not answering the last chat question, but when someone is being repetitious, a facilitator can use paraphrasing to help that person summarize his or her thinking. I might add that when several people are saying the same thing, a facilitator can use paraphrasing to summarize multiple people's comments succinctly so that what's being possibly interpreted as 2 different thought processes, which may be one, can be captured and hopefully move the whole particular discussion forward in a positive way, reaching some convergence in that particular issue. If someone is exaggerating or distorting, a facilitator can validate the central point of the discussion, and you can avoid quarreling over its accuracy. It's a challenge, but it can be done. I have had cases, just as an aside on this one, where there was a common behavior with a contributing member who was valuable in many ways, but often there was a lot of exaggeration or distortion in their communication of certain kind of feedback. You can meet with them one-on-one, offline, not challenging them, not quarreling with them, but trying to help them succinctly communicate an issue without using exaggeration or distortion. The next point is when someone goes off on a tangent, a facilitator can treat the speaker with full respect by asking the person to help everyone see how his or her points connects with the broader context. I have seen that work very effectively, where many times as the individual tries to bring their particular topic or point back in, they themselves recognize that what they were talking about was a different issue. And I'm not saying that will always happen, but I do think it's important to reach back out and see if they can solve that particular issue by understanding that what they were talking about was a tangent. If you have a new speaker who doesn't have a lot of skills in these particular situations, they may be speaking a little awkwardly in broken sentences, they may be nervous. The facilitator can help the speaker relax by drawing him or her out with open-ended, non-directive questions. You know, are you saying this? And then try to paraphrase or repeat back what you think you've heard. And they have a chance then to agree or not agree. And if they're not, then you may ask them another open-ended question to see if you can get some clarity on what particular issue they're trying to bring forward or point they're trying to make. Everybody's favorite topic. Dealing with difficult dynamics. Many groups have someone who, and you could pick any one of these. I am going to read them because I think it's important to listen them out. Maybe some of you have other points. Repeats ideas that someone else has already expressed. Quibbles over minor details. Openly expresses strong emotion. Takes the discussion to a very abstract level. Uses jargon that is difficult to understand. Continue to raise as a pet issue no matter what topic is being discussed. Criticizes without offering constructive suggestions. Complains about how little progress the group is making. Repeats his or her own point over and over again. Argues as a way of clarifying an idea. Brings up obscure problems that waste time on insignificant tangents. Makes long-winded speeches. Cloaks disagreements with insincere sugarcoating. Talks in too loud a voice as if everyone else were hard of hearing, apologizes for everything she or he says, blames other people without acknowledging his or her own part, nitpicks whenever someone uses an analogy to make a point, just sits silently and rarely contributes, acts smug and self-assured as if she or he knows everything, whispers to someone sitting nearby while someone else is talking. There was a question that was asked earlier about how to deal with some difficult dynamics. I think there's a solution, or at least a suggested approach within this particular group here. You could ask the co-chair or whoever's running the meeting, what are the group norms within this particular work group? And if it's not clear, you could even ask for what are the supportive group norms? In other words, let's try to make sure that before we talk about the content, let's talk about the process. You could have a discussion what breaks the overall conversation into small groups. Typically, we've done that at work group meetings where a lot of us are physically present. You could also do that in Zoom or other places as well. You can engage in a period of suspended judgment. You could switch to a structured go-around. We've used that approach frequently. If there's a lot of strong opinions, and it seems like there's a lot of back and forth, you can just kind of say, let's settle down, let's hear everybody's particular viewpoint. And you can just literally go around the table. And you can have someone document those particular points. I've done that on whiteboards or whatever other approach you care to use, where then you can kind of identify, is there a pattern here to some of these comments? Are they truly different? And are we talking about the same thing? Are we on different subject matters? You could acknowledge outside distractions. You can attempt to apply some rules of etiquette, if you will, for how the meeting should be conducted and make sure that certain distractions are not present. You could ask for certain conversations. I've seen this in meetings where people are having another important conversation, but really shouldn't be held in the work group meeting. It's not off topic. You maybe ask them to step outside the room or handle that discussion at a later time. You can encourage more people to participate. I believe this is a strong, strong skill that every co-chair should have. You need to read your audience. You need to read that group of people and ask them to share if they're quiet. In other words, they've contributed a little bit, but they seem to be hesitant. You may know that somebody in the room has a lot to offer, but they haven't said a word. And you may say, oh, I believe that you work for a software vendor who's dealing with this particular issue. How are you dealing with that right now? That doesn't mean that will be the solution. But what you're doing is you're collecting a little bit more information that's on topic to discussion that hopefully then coalesces around a sustainable solution at the end of the day. And lastly, and not necessarily last in terms of what you may choose to do, you could educate your members about group dynamics. I haven't been in one of these groups, but I know people that have, and I know that they've had to basically have a meeting that talks about group dynamics. Simply, that's the topic of the conversation, where there's some education. Sometimes it's best if it's conducted by somebody that's external to their group. It doesn't have to be done that way. But that's another mechanism that I've seen used not only at boards, but in other kinds of groups as well. That's been very effective. Let me go back to the chat once more just to see if that was on target or helpful at all in terms of that one issue that you had. Okay. How can you avoid deadlock loop for some discussion items as a facilitator? Some might have seen a solution to decision, but they keep brought up no matter of previous decisions, and how balance higher volume subject matter expert opinion versus other participants who might have different opinions. I'm still reading here, so pardon me. The decision is made by a few versus the majority in this case. I think that a decision that's made by a few and rather than the majority, okay, is not a decision that is going to be sustainable in the long run. It doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of knowledge in that, but if you're leaving some people out of that decision-making loop, if they don't feel part of the decision, if they feel threatened or challenged or, oh, here we go again, those two people are dictating the solution to me, that doesn't really leave much of a good feeling in people's stomach when they walk out of that discussion or meeting. That doesn't mean that they need to understand every subject matter and every point that's being brought in by the, so to speak, subject matter experts that contribute a lot to that discussion. But it does mean that somebody needs to bring those individuals along so that it doesn't mean you're going to make them a subject matter expert, but you need to kind of bring them into that discussion so they feel empowered and they feel like, oh, I get it. In other words, the light bulb is going off. They have some understanding. They're getting some comfort level that they're sitting in this meeting and it isn't being dictated to them. It's part of a group discussion. Sometimes they're not going to be part of the solution, meaning they won't have contributed new material to it, but they still will feel like part of this group. So every member of a work group is not all in every discussion going to contribute equally. Some will have expertise in various different ways. Some will be very technical. Some will be very customer-centric, as they should be. They understand a lot of those customers' requirements. Some people will know the resources forwards and backwards. Some will have greater technical expertise. Some will have domain knowledge. The combination of all those particular points of view are important, but not all of them apply in all particular cases. And some will have vocabulary skills, great skills that need to be part of the solution. In some topics, the vocabulary skills may be something that you don't have. That doesn't mean that you might not find value in understanding and being able to understand how that particular decision or solution was brought to bear. But I do think you need to have them leave that particular discussion with some kind of understanding that, okay, I kind of get it. This is not my domain area of expertise. It's not my area of understanding every point that's being made, but I get it. And as a facilitator, you need to kind of look out for that. Look for those tensions if you can. Try to identify them and find some way to kind of communicate that to the group so that everybody's brought into the solution. I think we're winding down here, and I know I've kind of went through this pretty quickly, but so we have these overall principles for building sustainable agreements. Understand the dynamics of the group decision making. And I guess I'm going to underline, understand the dynamics of your group as a co-chair. Yes, you need to understand the dynamics of group decision making so you can be a good facilitator, but that requires that you understand the dynamics of the members of your group. You want to encourage full participation from the experts, from the novices, from the people who have a little bit of understanding, but maybe not complete understanding of the issue. You want to promote mutual understanding. So you want to educate some people to bring their level of understanding up, raise it up. You want to foster and foster inclusive solutions, and you want to cultivate a shared responsibility. So if you're coming to a pharmacy work group and we are making some changes to a resource, if you're the newest person in that group, or you somebody that's been there for 10 years, it's my belief that you all share a responsibility in making sure that whatever you're developing, whatever problem you're solving, whatever issue you're discussing, you all have a shared responsibility in that outcome. You want everybody to be on the same page at the end of the day. What are the skills? Patience, perseverance, and tolerance. I don't think those are surprises. We're winding down here. The retrospective is just covering those basic topics. We talked about facilitator roles, the formal roles. Compare and contrast the role of facilitator, the role of work group co-chair. And again, my emphasis on that point is that there is a shared responsibility of facilitation in both of those individuals. The dynamics of group decision-making, facilitating listening skills, dealing with difficult dynamics, principles for building sustainable agreements. All of those are critical skills. More questions? Let's see if we have a few more. Another question. One of the questions I have, which may fit better into a future section. Okay. We see a lot of meeting, facilitation, and note-taking, but how do we ensure contribution and subject matter is retained and advanced by the entire group solution? I see hundreds of threads, and good conversation simply die in the history of facilitated meeting minutes and notes. That's a great question. I don't know if I have a good answer to that. There's a formal process, obviously, in at least a work group meeting. And we have formal roles. I'm assuming all work groups do. We have scribes and chairs. One of our co-chairs is responsible for co-chairing the meeting. They're the one that makes sure that we discuss all the topics on the agenda. And our scribe is making sure they're taking minutes of everything we're discussing at some level of detail, and perhaps referencing trackers if that's a discussion around that particular topic, or external documents if those are brought to the meeting, and facilitating that communication and exchange of that information. That's a formal process for terms of documenting that. And you can call that note-taking. But how do we ensure contribution? We communicate in our minutes, at least that we take, who it is that's communicated the various issues or topics or questions for that matter, and our resolution, if we have a resolution, and sometimes we don't. So when you're talking about ensuring contribution from a subject matter that's retained and advanced, I would suggest that some of the conversations that go on, for instance, in Zulip, may not make their way back into the minutes. However, if an issue is raised, and there's just one that recently came up in pharmacy, again, I'm sorry for all those pharmacy examples. Those are just the most tangible for me right now. Regarding how to document codes using a code system called RxNorm in the United States. Well, that particular discussion just didn't exist in Zulip. We're bringing it back into the work group in our conference, and it's a topic to be discussed in that group, which means it will be whatever we talk about in that group will be raised and communicated back to Zulip, but also resonant in our minutes so that we can document clearly what was the problem and then what came out of the discussion. And if something needs to change, in other words, does a resource need to change? Does there need to be a new element? Is there some other issue? Do we need to involve the vocabulary folks themselves into this discussion? All of that needs to be pulled out of that particular topic. I don't know that that answers your question completely, but that's at least one way I know in which some of that kind of communication happens. Can we require anyone attending a meeting must provide information to the facilitators? I'm not sure I understand all the details. I do know that, again, this goes back to how our weekly conference calls work, at least my understanding, and I believe also our work group meeting minutes work. We expect to understand your name, what organization you work for, and I don't know if we require your email. I do not know. I don't believe we do in our weekly conference call minutes, but it would not be unusual if for some reason you were brand new to the group that we would reach out and ask for that kind of detailed information. So when you say contact, are you talking about phone number, email, or something like that? But I think if there were issues that a facilitator picked up in a meeting and wanted to follow up with an individual, as you know, in Zulip and other kinds of organizations, you could single thread and reach out to them and ask for individual contact information because you wanted to follow up with them for a specific purpose. You could do that at a work group meeting as well. I think work group meetings also require that I have your name and what organization, if you are affiliated with one, we have that information. And if that's off target, please respond again in the chat and let me know. Time management. I don't know if it's a great question. I don't know if time management's a facilitation skill, but I certainly think it's important, but I'm not sure how I would answer that question with my facilitation skill set off the top of my head. Virginia, if you don't mind my mentioning your name, if you have any suggestions, I'm fine with that. And I'm fine if we unmute this, if we want to take a few discussions and a few minutes and discuss any other questions. So, and here's another question. Let's see, a piggyback on Virginia's. How much of a time commitment should new co-chairs expend on a weekly, monthly basis? You'll probably hear different questions. So while I'm a co-chair, I actually attend 2 other work group meetings where I'm not a co-chair. So I spend about, so if it was just the meeting, that would be 3 hours a week. But let's just say my pharmacy commitment, 1 hour, and I would suggest that I have another hour, maybe 2 hours on a normal week. If it's a particular project that I'm actively involved in, that could extend quite a bit. That could be, 5, 6 hours or whatever. It depends upon what kind of commitment you have with that particular project. It really varies. But I would suggest that I spend probably 5 hours or less on weekly work group co-chair responsibilities that I have committed to, independent of board work. I'm not talking about anything with the HL7 board where I'm also involved. Okay. And the answer to my question about what what was important in terms of contact information. Yeah, phone and email. And I don't believe we require phone and email on that. Although if someone is an HL7 member and you are an HL7 member, you can go to the directory and look them up and find contact information from there. And I believe email definitely is there.
John, are you still there?
I'm here. I think that's it. And I understood the time management question. Okay. Thank you. Any
Any
other
other questions from the group?
questions?
Congrats. It was a very insightful presentation.
Thank you for that. Here's a bonus slide, by the way. I inherited a lot of these slides from AMS, for those of you who know him, and he had included this in his presentation. I thought it was worthwhile to share as well. So when you get the presentation, you'll get all of these.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks a lot, John. Excellent
Sure.
presentation. Good discussion, everyone. And as I said, I'll send you the link to the recording later. Till we meet again. Bye, everyone. Bye, John. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye all.